has like this has this rare opportunity that there's a hungry world out there, even for serious, but adult level performers. So that's my thank you before we start. So for the how and why to commission, there are some people who have said to me, tell them why, because the world needs it and it's your obligation. I don't think that way. To me, why to commission is why do you want to commission? What's driving you to want to commission? And that's important because that's how do you pick a composer who's the right composer for what you want, for your needs, which doesn't always happen, particularly with people who are not used to commissioning a lot. There are thousands of composers who you could go to. So to choose the best path to your goal, you have to really understand what your personal goal is, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes out of pressure for, peer pressure about who to commission. Sometimes you already know someone whose flute music you like and you just want more repertoire for them, or they've written great C flute music or other woodwind music, and they seem like a great opportunity for low flute. So it's that, any reason is good. And I think probably what I just said is the most frequent reason to commission somebody. But depending on your circumstances or an organization who wants to be involved backing you, sometimes commissioners specifically want someone who's famous as the composer or with an extra cachet like prizes or other things they can write about. Maybe they want a local professor tied in with the school or who has a social or ethnic trait that you want to support. Every reason is a great reason. It doesn't, anything that motivates you to want to commission, but also make sure you love their music at the same time, unless you know, in some cases, that you care more about the buzz that will be generated than the actual results. That's usually a motivation more for organizations than for individual performers. But all of this is out there. If you want an orchestra to commission a concerto for you to play, things like that might be more of a factor than if you wanted to commission a chamber or solo piece for yourself. But again, to be a little redundant, none of this is right or wrong. Just be consistent to get the composer who solves the motivation that you have. Maybe it's a degree requirement or a tenure requirement that you have to commission a piece. Some people don't want to commission a piece. They don't want to play a premiere, but the school requires them to for their experience. So again, people who are in that circumstance, especially, should commission a composer whose musical style they're already comfortable with. So it's less of a challenge for them to fill that requirement. Um, so on a related note, regarding what sometimes people refer to as DEI composers, these are composers, period. There are a lot of composers who have personal attributes that are looked at as DEI, but they're composers, just the way that Schoenberg was a composer who used 12 tone. He wasn't a 12 tone composer because that puts things backwards. There are so many hundreds and hundreds of composers who are women or non-white, etc., that's where you start. And then you go through all the other filtering of are there musical attributes right for you so that you wind up with a good artistic match. Another filter from the beginning is if you have a specific timeline in mind. There are some composers, usually the ones who are less well established, who can write a piece for you starting today in November for your recital in May, or even shorter. Many composers who are more established may be backed up for several years or somewhere in the middle. But I just got asked yesterday if I would write somebody a concerto for his senior recital this year. He was right to ask. I mean, he knew some of my other music and he was right to ask. And I said, sorry, I couldn't do that, but maybe someone else can. Always ask, but never take it for granted also. Related to that, Always talk about whatever specifics matter to you in the commission, if there are such specifics, but there are always some. The exact instrumentation usually should be agreed on from the beginning if it's chamber or recital music. Certainly with low flute commissions, you want to talk about what instrument or instruments are specific to the commission. But is it with piano? Is it with strings? Do you care one way or another? If you, the commissioner on the lead instrument, is doubling different low flutes or C flute with low, what about the other instruments? Are you going to ask the clarinetist to double bass? Don't take anything for granted because composers might imagine things that you didn't discuss whether or not to include, and you may be surprised. Many of you may know the piece that Yves Beglarian wrote for this book called Eight Visions. Mario Martin commissioned 8 composers specifically to write for C flute and piano. And they signed something and agreed only C flute and piano. Presser was excited to have a book that was only C flute and piano. And Eve wrote a piece that was absolutely gorgeous, that was for alto or bass with electronic audio behind it, right? You all know this piece. You probably all played it. It's such a wonderful piece. We didn't know what to do with it when it came in. She had gone against the agreement with Maria and with what Presser was going to publish. And some people were annoyed that she didn't follow the rules. But, in the long run, there are 2 pieces that you hear all the time that came from that book. The other one is by Chen Yi. But Eve's piece, it's played at NFA every single year, I think, at least once every time. But that can happen to you in ways that you don't necessarily like. Maybe you write a bass flute piece where you have to double C or double piccolo or the other player. So make sure to spell it out. If you don't spell it out, it's more likely that you will be surprised. This might seem, the next thing I'm going to say might seem too obvious, but it isn't, I promise. If you want a solo piece, specify if you mean unaccompanied or a featured solo with piano accompaniment, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen commissions backfire, as well as calls for scores or auditions or whatever, because the word solo really could mean either one. And if it's accompanied doesn't necessarily mean piano. It usually does. It could mean any other instrument or media. I made a mistake with a recent commission for 6-part clarinets because I assumed that it was for 6 players. So I wrote a sextet that balanced evenly with mixed clarinet sizes, one of each. Got to the score where they had an ensemble with 1 player on the E flat part and 20 on each of the regular clarinet parts. For flute choir, that works with 1 piccolo, but for clarinet choir, it doesn't. And I thought I was writing a sextet, and it's on me I should have known better to ask. So when you're commissioning for low flutes, even if you're commissioning flute players, I think, make sure that the composer understands about the dynamics for each size instrument, or maybe your individual strengths. Some people can play low Bs on a bass flute that are really loud. I know most composers are afraid to do that. And our experience as non-flutists sometimes comes from the recordings that we study that have artificial balance. Sometimes comes from a concert we went to, and it depends on the acoustics of the hall or where we sat. I learned, with great thanks to Wendy Stern, who I wrote a few bass pieces for, that because of the ergonomics of playing bass, the page turns take more time, at least if you're playing on paper. You can't just go like this the way you can with a smaller flute, that, putting it down takes time. I don't know how that affects iPad use, but most composers, if they're wise, which is a little presumptuous, need to compose these days, knowing that some people will play from iPads and some people will play from paper. People who play from paper, it could be from something that's bound and folded, or it could be loose sheets. but either way, they need a hand and probably a left hand, not necessarily depending on what your ergonomics are playing flute. Another thing I just heard about, again, thank you to Wendy, about how different the response time is for a bass flute, an alto flute, and a piano trying to play crisply on the downbeat. In some ways, that's not the composer's responsibility, because if we want a crisp beat with those three together, I don't feel like that's a no-no. But it's important to know that that's tricky, especially in a very fast passage. If it's going tit, 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 or dig, 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 on different notes, I don't know, you tell me, but I think low flute players probably will find that more challenging than high flute players. And the composer may be disappointed, which means then that the performers may be. Another thing to always put into a commission agreement is the duration of the piece. And I don't mean too specifically, because that's hard to do if you want a concert and recital piece. If you're looking for something to sync to a video, then you do have exact timings, and that's a whole different type of commission. But if you want a recital piece, a chamber piece, within a few minutes, most of the time, not always, most of the time, you'll care if it's in the 5 to 8 range or the 12 to 15 range of minutes. And then to an extent, take what you get. But once in a while, you can't be flexible. Sometimes you specifically need a piece of a certain length to fill out a recital, and you only have the stage for a certain amount of time. So you really can't go over. That isn't too often, but it happens. I had a performance canceled because I went too long with a piece. I was surprised, but it can happen. Another thing that should be discussed in advance, and this is more of the specifics, is that sometimes you have a theme or a concept that you want the piece to be about or evoking. Maybe you have an all nature concert or something that's about every different part of the world, and everyone's got to pick a travel theme or something socio-political. If it doesn't matter, you don't have to talk about it, obviously. But if you have a theme, be as specific as you can so that it doesn't backfire. If this were an hour and a half lecture, I could have some stories, but it wouldn't work in 60 minutes about some commissions where the commissioner misinterpreted, no, the commissionee misinterpreted what the commissioner meant by a theme about equality or about a trip to Japan or something. Um, Misunderstandings happen so easily because words mean so many different things to different people in ways that a lot of people take for granted that their interpretation of a word is exactly right and the only one. Um, Related to this is choosing the best fit of a composer if you want something very topical. And in some ways, this might seem obvious. My exaggerated example that wouldn't happen is, let's say around 1915, you had all the money in the world to commission any famous performer you want. And you had two pieces. One is about how beautiful springtime is, and the other is the agony of death. And on your list was Debussy and Schoenberg. Who are you going to pick for which piece? You know, Schoenberg wouldn't write about the beauty of spring, and Debussy wouldn't write about the agony of death. Although actually Debussy's last piece, I don't mean the trio, because that's pretty grim, but he wrote a choral piece about the orphans of World War II. Sorry, the orphans of World War One, but it was beautiful. It was sad. It sounded like Debussy, but in a more tangible way, some of you who play in bands may know Samuel Barber's Commando March. In my subjective opinion, I love pretty much everything he ever wrote, except the Commando March isn't Samuel Barber. Like, there are a lot of other composers in the middle of the 20th century who are Americans who could write a Commando March. Barber writes beautiful music and lyrical music. So I only say that because it's one of the ways that you can not be disappointed if you have something specific in mind. Some composers have such a specific kind of sound or sonority that no matter what they do, it sounds like them. And some have, people like Copland and Stravinsky could really write in such a broad palette, yet always sound like Copland, always sound like Stravinsky. Artists say this about Picasso. Certain features always sound like Picasso. So also specifics that don't always come up, but they might sometimes, is difficulty. Most of the people who I'm talking to today, because I see the names and know at least half of you, are professionals where difficulty isn't going to be an issue. But there's no reason not to commission pieces for your students, or if you're an intermediate player, to commission something. Or maybe you're a professional who doesn't like to play multiphonics or beatbox effects or whatever. Everything should be discussed. For low instruments, I think that most composers, other than flutists, might not know that the high range on the big flutes for most players is more of a challenge than if they were writing for C flute. And likewise with fingering for high range, response for high range, all of this. And maybe there's a richer supply. I don't know the answer to this. Maybe there's a richer supply to multiphonics on low flutes than on regular flutes. That's certainly true with reed instruments, that the lower instruments have so much more possibilities for special effects. Um,
Yeah, I
Also,
mean,
yeah, go ahead. Go
yeah.
ahead.
One other thing is that the dynamics on the big flutes for the high register is less than the low register.
Chris did some arrangements that Presser published, and I was looking at the alto book and the alto book and the bass book, and comparing, proofreading them against each other before the music came into print. And I saw, Chris, your dynamics don't match in the piano for the alto and the bass, but everything else matches. Was this a mistake? And you said, no, it's got to be quieter for the bass than for the alto in order to balance. Um, Great lesson for me as your publisher and as someone writing for these instruments. Um, some of you may know Amanda Harburg's Firefly Triptych, or will be getting to know it soon, the alto piece. She was working with several great alto players and sensitive pianists and did the same thing. She, more cautious dynamics at the bottom range for the alto. Not everyone agrees, um, but it's something to be aware of, particularly because you're writing for an instrument, or your commissionees are writing for an instrument that seems like a C flute until they really get to know the difference. Um, I alluded to, oh, and the low B. Is there a low B? Does the low C sound well? These are other things or does the C to D flat trill well? That does the D flat to E flat at the bottom trill well? These are things that are probably among the biggest mistakes or challenges, even for C flute writing. What about breath control? Um, how long can you hold a sustained phrase without needing a breath in between? Things to talk about. Another one is, in many cases, a commissioner does want a specific delivery deadline because you've already planned a premiere date and you need a certain buffer of time to learn the piece. A lot of commissions work like that. Some commissions don't. Sometimes the commissioner just says, oh, I really want a piece from this composer. Once I get it, I'll think about more tangibly when to premiere it. Others say, I've got a recital or I've got a slot at a convention, so I need it this far in advance to be ready in case my proposal's accepted. Whether or not you have a deadline can be very helpful in either direction to communicate with your composer so that they don't rush unnecessarily. Some composers will care so much about the rush deadline that they won't give you their very best work. And I don't understand why any composer would do that, but that's me. Some composers say if it's got my name on it and I'm spending my time on it, it's going to last forever. I want every piece to be my best one. Others say, oh my God, I have so many deadlines. I have to sort of take this movement from this piece and not rewrite this movement, which isn't as good as I. So it depends on the composer. But it also depends on communication in both directions. Sometimes you have a preferred deadline that isn't too critical. So it's, again, something to discuss. And also, I haven't gotten into this litany yet, but put everything in writing. Always put everything in writing that you have agreed on. That matters. I'll become redundant about this later on today. But if it isn't in writing, it didn't happen. If it isn't in writing, it was a conversation and an exploration without a commitment, even if you feel there's a verbal commitment, even if it's your best friend. Um, I would say that probably always these days, you need a force majeure clause. Force majeure is what used to be called an act of God. Force majeure means major force in French. Today, I think it means if there's a hurricane or COVID or a blizzard and there's a cancellation, what it really refers to very specifically, if there are forces beyond anyone's control, why, if the composer's unconscious for half a year, they may want to have the deadline extended. And if you need it for a recital, you just can't, or you can postpone. But what happens in these cases? A lot of you who are professional performers might have had issues with venues or employers like orchestras who aren't getting the revenue from the concerts, who have a commitment to pay you. Some musicians during the recent big pandemic did get paid, some didn't get paid. And in most cases, there was no agreement. Like, what if all of a sudden the concert hall is dark for a year because no one saw that coming? Sometimes there are. A lot of concerts contracts will will deal with that. But if time matters, establish it in advance in the agreement because it's a lot easier to do that than it is after it's too late. And in most cases, the composer will be equally glad to keep things clear with you. You can also preserve friendships if there are problems later on. I'll get more to that a little bit later too. Now, most of the things I've said so far are pretty easy to navigate. It's more about being aware that you should navigate it, and then it's easy to take care of and easy to discuss with a composer. I think the hard part, the awkward part, especially if you are paying from your pocket rather than an organization, and especially if you're commissioning someone who you are friends with or a friendly acquaintance, is the fee. How much the remuneration is. There's no standard. There's no real chart that's a standard of any kind. There are some charts around that are advocated by composer organizations, but they're not really reliable, and they even hedge everything they say. Um, there are a lot of factors that can come into whether or not something should go up or down, but every composer has a different need, similar to if you get hired to play a concerto. One person might accept a high fee in some context or a low fee in the others. I see Chris just wrote about filling in the blanks. That's a great shortcut if you have the flexibility to negotiate with them. Some composers have that. I more or less do that because it's not what I do. It's not so much to control and get what I want. It's got all these all these circumstances discussed in advance. It's mostly to prevent misunderstandings later. But different composers have different preferences, and in most cases, it's negotiable. And if there are things they won't budge on that you feel are an absolute must for you, then you're not going to have a fit. Um, so some of the factors that can include whether a fee will go high or low are how in demand the composer is, which usually has a big part to do with it, but not necessarily. Related to that, how long will it take them to write the piece? Which usually might be seen as the duration of the piece, but it isn't necessarily the same thing. An unaccompanied solo or a piece for one instrument with piano will take less time than an orchestral concerto or an octet or whatever usually. So the amount of time the composer spends seems like a really valid way to be one factor in what the remuneration could be. The potential for future performances, on one hand, isn't your concern. It may be for you to play it, but it certainly for most composers, or I should say for many composers, is a factor that probably is more acute with writing for low flute than for writing for C flute. I say that because if somebody writes a 10-minute piece for C flute and piano, the world has a lot of people who could play it. Whether or not they want to, whether or not there's a glut anyway, at least practically speaking, there's quite a lot of people who have access to a C flute in 10 minutes on stage. That might not be as true. That certainly isn't as true for bass or contra. Some composers don't care about that. They want to do something that's fresh and they don't care about if it will become on a mandatory list or a real barn burner. Some composers do, some composers don't. So that could be a factor. And actually, and this is important, some composers might be so eager to fill in the gap of not having enough literature for low flutes, they may be more eager to do that than they would be for C flute. So you have to know who you're working with, sound them out. The eagerness level is part of any negotiation. It's no different from buying a house or anything else where you have flexible negotiation. Related to this very much is how much can you help the composer's career? Some composers, I think the smart ones, which means I'm volunteering that I feel this way, may be more eager to write a piece for a low fee if they're writing for somebody who is so well established in their performance career out there, or who has open doors, or the event itself, like a Friday night concert at NFA, if that's if a gala at NFA is already a lock for this, it's an opportunity for a composer who's not as well known as they want to be to have a lot of flute players in the audience. That's, sometimes that will happen. Likewise, if you're somebody who makes commercial recordings or has a terrific YouTube presence or does a lot of touring or is the head of a major competition for low flutes or decides all state rep for low flutes, the composer may realize that you certainly have the opportunity to say, hey, if I'm doing this, it can give you a big leg up for people recognizing your name in the future. Some composers will care a lot about that and see that as a way of bartering the value of the event. The main thing is make it worth it for the composer. That really is the payoff to negotiate a commission. Make it worth it for the composer, sort of like the first thought is a dollar number. But individuals who don't have the adequate budget often have a way to barter that will make it worth it for the composer in other ways, or a combination of not no fee, but a compromised fee and plus a different kind of payoff. I just did something with April Clayton's trio, flute, viola, harp. I wanted more money than they were prepared to give. And we agreed that in addition, that I would take a different fee, plus April and her harp player would put on their next CD a flute and harp piece of mine. That meant so much to me because I love this flute and harp piece that isn't out there yet. And April and her harp player are going to put it on a major label. So that was one way to barter. The way that you might barter with some other composer is if you can build them a website that they need and they don't know how to do it. Recordings of their music is something that every strong performer can do that some composers want. Maybe you can do engraving for them. Maybe you can give music lessons for their children, or maybe someone close to you on your behalf will give music lessons to their children, or teach them English, or teach them a foreign language. Um, there were just so many ways of doing it. My favorite one, not to talk about myself too much, but I just love this story. I have a solo piccolo piece that Lois Urbine commissioned, and Lois had commissioned a lot of composers up to that point, and then she had two daughters in high school, and the family budget had to change because of the upcoming college tuition. And she said, "I really want you to write me this piece, but I don't have any commission money." I just moved into this house where I am now, and when I moved in, it was tree lined, which I love. You might have noticed many of my covers of publications have trees on them. I moved into this house, and all the trees came down within a year or two because they were like 150 years old and just dying from various things. So now I'm,
Oh, I thought
hmm?
you were talking.
Sorry, Carolyn, I didn't hear what you said. I'll continue. Um, but so this piccolo player, Lois Herbine, has an incredible backyard. It's like a little Giverny in her backyard. She loves gardening. She's got great land and is so dedicated to it that people go to her house in addition to visit. The first thing is, "Oh, I want to see your backyard today," because it's just got the most incredible any time of the year other than the dead of winter. It's just an incredible set of gardens. So I said to Lois, "How about this? No fee in dollars, but in the peak of the season, we'll fill up my car with cuttings, saplings, everything, transplants from your garden, and you'll teach me how to transplant them and how to maintain it." She was thrilled because that's something that means a lot to her as well. Plus, she could get this commission without any dollar amount. I was thrilled because it's something I wanted to have and I didn't know how to get it. So sometimes there's a fit that works if it's a barter. Another main way that's becoming more and more popular, say in the last 10 or 15 years, is a consortium. Uh, Having many co-commissioners is a great way to get more money than you want to pay yourself. And it's a great way for the composer also to get more payment, but also more performances, more performers knowing their music from the top. It will usually cost you organizational time. It will cost somebody organizational time, excuse me, to enroll these people and to administer. And it can get complicated with who has the rights to play it when and how the music gets disseminated. There's a lot that doesn't necessarily meet the eye. But if one person is organized out of the whole group, you can get a lot of activity. Going back to what happened with Firefly Triptych, that originally was two people's co-commission, and by the time word got out, it in the long run there were 48 co-commissioners on it, and that I would say is a little bit on the rare side for it to be so rich like that, but it's usually pretty easy to go from one or two to 5 to 10 co-commissioners and with a low buy-in and everybody benefits. One of the things that I'm changing gears here a little bit. One of the things that can be confusing and can cause misunderstandings and is especially important to be in writing is ownership and rights of the resulting piece. There's nothing in the copyright law that allows anything to the commissioner that isn't specifically put in writing. A new creative work, according to the US copyright law, is completely owned by the creator of that work, except for anything that's put in writing. Once it's in writing, it's whatever you agree to, but you can't take anything for granted. In other words, I paid you $5,000 for this piece. I want to be able to sell it to my friends too. Only if that's in the commission agreement. The performer starts out legally with zero rights, but any commission agreement is going to give the commissioner, I would hope, certain rights that matter to the commissioner. The most common one is the right to the world premiere. Not every commissioner necessarily wants the world premiere. Many do, but it absolutely should be in writing. Otherwise, you could be surprised and unhappy, and it's an easy problem to avoid. In addition to the exclusive rights to the world premiere, sometimes commissioners want 6 months or the end of the school year or 1 year, in some cases, even more than 1 year, where you're the only person who can play it at all. Never take that for granted. Ask for it if you want. If the fee is not tiny, the composers often will agree to that. Some performers insist on 2 years, and some composers will agree to that. To me, that's a little too long because, like, by the time it's available to other people, it's not technically a new work. Some performers care about that. Other performers don't. Some care that it's new to them or new to the world, not what year it was first premiered in. But it's just a topic to discuss. And again, that, especially that extended exclusivity, has to be in writing. And if it's 2 years from the premiere date or 1 year from the premiere date, then the next day it's not exclusive anymore. Exclusive, and this can be tricky and sensitive too. Exclusive, just like a fee is exact, the exclusivity expiration is exact. Now, I've seen a few things happen that, this is really tricky. The first recording rights is another thing in here, but typically that's first commercial recording rights. Once the music is out there, other people are going to play it. Once the music is out there, you can control, theoretically, or the composer or their publisher can control commercial recordings because the first commercial recording needs permission. But once the music is out there, it will be on YouTube and other social media, and you just can't stop that. Again, some commissioners do care and some don't about that. And always whatever's in writing is valid. But there's a way to avoid that kind of problem, which is, and this is something I've learned from getting burned in this way. I used to, if somebody had a commission with an exclusive premiere that was coming up in a few months or a year, I might share the music with a few trusted friends and say, you can't perform it until after such and such. But I know you're eager to perform it soon after the exclusive expires. So I trust you not to perform the music, and I'll give it to you so you can start practicing. You might even tell me whether or not there's some awkward tonguings or fingerings that I should know about, and that would be great too. Once in a while, one of those people just can't hold themselves back from an opportunity. Or and in one case, I said, you can't perform it. The commission agreement said no one else can perform it. And somebody made a YouTube before the premiere. The commission agreement didn't forbid that, even though it was implicit, but it wasn't stated. So you might want to ask your composer to include a clause that says the music may not be shared with anybody until the end of the exclusivity period. If that happens, then it's explicit that nobody else could have leaked something on the side, even a little soiree at their house before the premiere. You might not care, but if you do, then the composer needs to, if you put that in agreement that you can't share this with anybody until the premiere or the end of the exclusivity, then they have to honor that. And I think they all will, or most will. And there's no misunderstanding that way. If anything bad happens, it's explicit that the composer shouldn't have let anyone else see it. In the rare cases where you might be commissioning, really hiring a composer, like let's say you want music for a little animation, synchronizing for a podcast, and you want to have the permanent rights to that piece because you're not commissioning an artistic work to be in the literature. It's a functional kind of request. That's called a work for hire, and the copyright law talks about work for hires. You use the term work for hire in the agreement, although technically you don't have to if you have all the terms in it. But work for hire refers to when, let's say, a production company hires a composer to write theme music for a video. It could be anything. That's just a common example. Part of the paperwork says the composer is paid in full upfront and has no financial or copyright claim to what's created thereafter. Sort of like if you hire an artist to do a poster or a web designer to do your web, you are buying a product. You're not commissioning a work of art, that you're the patron of. So as long as that's clear in writing, it's fine. Composers might say, that's fine with me as long as your podcast gives me name credit when you talk about who the producer was and, any other thing where it would be appropriate to give a credit. Not every composer cares. Those of you who are not yet experienced in doing commissions, usually the standard agreement includes paying the composer 50% up front. If it's a lot of money, you might agree to pay 33% or anything else up front. By doing that, you have guaranteed the composer that their time won't be wasted because you changed your mind. This is something I've seen happen also. Sometimes somebody's all excited about a composer because they've heard another piece of theirs and they really love that, but they commission. Then they hear lots of other music by that composer and don't like any of it. They say, uh-oh, I don't think I want to go through with this. If it was no money down, you can default and the composer might have wasted time working on it. Always when you put money down, it's a commitment. Just like buying a house again. Or I don't know how it works when you order a custom-made instrument, but it's probably sort of similar to that. Also, a down payment means that you're serious. In real estate, they call it earnest money to show that you mean it in earnest. Then you shouldn't pay the complete balance until you get everything. I mean, fair is fair in both directions. Usually the agreement will say the balance is due on delivery of all materials. But what does all materials mean? Does it mean you get a PDF, hopefully with extracted parts if that's what you want? Does it mean you'll get printed and folded version? Does it mean you'll get both? Most performers particularly want PDF version or a printed version with good page turns and cues and so on. Depending on the piece, you might not want extracted parts if the rhythm is so hard that you want to perform from score, or the rhythmic alignment, I should say, might make you want to perform for the score. Just always make it clear in the agreement what it means to deliver all the materials. This can come up if, let's say you want something with media and the composer surprises you with a 4-track audio when you only want a 2-track. You just never know. So the more what ifs, the easier it gets. And as was pointed out before, if the composer already has an agreement, you don't have to think too hard about what to include, although you ought to. If you're taking notes on what I'm saying, or Chris is recording, right? So you can go back and jot down. This can be like a great checklist to do things your own way, but take into consideration all these things that can be overlooked. Before we get to the end and Q&A, just my little litany about misunderstandings. Innocent misunderstandings happen like all the time. There are so many words in English that mean different things to different people. Sometimes without people even knowing that they mean different things. I just this week through my office was involved where a publisher, obviously my presser, and an opera company were involved with a new version of an opera. The term arrangements was given to somebody who only thinks of arrangements as new instrumental versions, because usually an arrangement of a piece is like a transcription or a free transcription. The business people making arrangements means making logistic arrangements for this event to happen. And so they were both talking about arrangements. They were both using the word correctly, and they both had no idea that the other party was using the word differently. So this is, I think, why a lot of contracts and legalese have like 5 different synonyms for words, that it can look overwhelming or redundant, but it's there because it can prevent misunderstandings from happening. Exactly when the performance exclusivity is over is one of these things. An important one is how to word the commissioner's name or organization or all co-commissioners on all copies of the music. Often the commissioner, not always, often the commissioner or their underwriter, who the composer didn't know about, really cares a lot about it. Let's say a local business gave you, or a flute manufacturer gave you money to commission a piece, and your agreement with that organization in writing is that they have to be named on the sheet music. You have to tell the composer that in your agreement with them, or else they won't know. This is something that I've seen come up a lot with publishing, because we get the music from the composer. They'll say commissioned by Christine Potter, for instance, without knowing, not that this would ever happen when Chris is in the middle, but you know what I mean? But then after it's over, oh, well, so-and-so bank in my town or Powell Flutes was supposed to be named on this. Can you throw away the print run and fix it? Or can you put stickers all over it? It's really easy to avoid circumstances like that, especially because if it's published in print and it's already gone to libraries and stores and customers, we can change what happens in the future. If you're self-published and selling downloads or selling paper, if you don't have a stockpile in a warehouse, it's easier to change sooner. But there's still copies that are out there, and you never know what happens to the copies that are out there. And you don't want to annoy somebody who was your underwriter, because they could be your underwriter again in the future if they felt good about it. Many contracts of any kind, not just musical commissions, and you may want to write this down from the recording later. Many contracts of all different kinds have a sentence towards the end with wording that basically says something to the extent of, everything in this written agreement is the totality of the agreement, and nothing else applies unless it's added in a later document signed by both parties. If you have that there, any conversation that matters to both of you can be, sometimes they call it memorializing an agreement. Just like a lot of times when people are discussing something over the phone, it's wise to have a phone call, negotiate by phone, brainstorm, kid around, make friends, trust each other, explore ideas by phone, and then send an email saying, here are my notes from our phone call to make sure that we both walk away with the same understanding. That's really, really helpful. It could also be, in that understanding is, we discussed so-and-so, but haven't reached an agreement yet on this topic. It just is a way that most people are not trying to pull something over on you. It's really easy to have a different understanding of how likely something is or what you had in mind. A lot of people, maybe a lot of performers and composers both, might be having lots of other similar conversations with other people and just simply don't remember which similar conversation was with which person. Two last little things. These days, DocuSign, eSign, electronic signature, whatever you want to call it, it's legally binding. It's as legally binding as ink. I personally feel not too good about that. It is easy to forge if you want to, even though there's a certification page on the organizations who specialize in being the middle agent for that. But signatures are hackable too. Scanned PDFs of signatures that get sent back and forth. Anything is hackable. So, e-signatures, people use it for large purchases. Aside from, I mean, I'm told by people they've spent $500,000 on a home with an e-signature. I couldn't do that. We once had a composer who, in writing in ink, did a really great job of changing a royalty percentage on a contract before sending it back. Changed a 50 to a 60, and like it was in the middle of a large thing. I happened to notice it, but some people can fake things. So at any rate, DocuSign is safe. One last little clause that should have been in the middle, and I added it at the end because I didn't think about it until the end, is another helpful clause given to me by someone who was commissioning me, whose brother was a lawyer, and read over the contract and said, add this. If the performer defaults on the premiere, the commissioning fee and the commissioner's notice still remains valid and in place. If the composer defaults on delivering the piece, any fee payments from the commissioner must be returned. That both makes it's very sensible. It's very mutual to both parties. It seems like ethically it should be obvious, but if it isn't in writing, you can hope that it happens. If it is in writing, then it has to happen. So now's a good time. Q&A. Chris, do you want to moderate this, or should I read through the chat? Or
I think the easiest thing to do, I've tried having people raise their hands before, but that I miss people. Put anything you want in the chat. And if you don't know where chat is, take your cursor down to the bottom of the Zoom screen. And on mine, it's the fourth one over. It says chat. And just click on that. And then you can enter your question in the chat, and make sure that you went in the two that it says meeting group chat rather than an individual. Okay, so we do have some
right.
questions.
Yeah,
that
so
are
I see what
already there.
Andrew wrote about basses and contras and trill keys. And again, to flutists, you know what a trill key is. To an other musician, I mean, woodwind players will get this. To a violinist,
Right.
you know,
No.
you can trill an A to a B or a D to an E with regular fingerings. You don't need a trill key. But the side keys and special side keys, they might not know what are the bad intervals. It would be easy to make a little chart or a list for somebody. For all I know, it's in one of Chris's books.
I'm going to put that in my advanced alto method, which is about to happen any minute now. But that's a good idea. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, and there will be instrument. I just read today that Petri's making piccolos with low C's now. Things change. So as of 2024, only this brand has a low C sharp to D, stuff like that. Another question from Andre: what kind of legal action might follow a violation of such a written agreement, like a premature? Is it similar to a copyright violation? It's a good question that's hard to answer because legally it's sort of like a copyright violation, but it's hard to say if there's any consequences to that. The composer could, or the performer could say, I'm not paying you the commission fee or the full commission fee because you didn't, you gave it to me second. And my name's still on it, but somebody scooped me. I think it just has to become a negotiation between the two parties then. Sometimes a big apology is all that's needed. It would, at the worst, go to small claims court, but usually there's not a whole lot of money involved in stuff like this. One of the things that will happen is you may lose a friend, or you may negotiate in such a way that you come to trust each other even better than you did before. If the composer said, oh man, I only gave it to someone who I trusted, who I shouldn't have, and it's totally my fault. I have not lost friends by doing that when I could have. Okay, Erin asks, after delivery, is that typically the end, or is there some back and forth to edit the piece once you start practicing? What is the best way to do this and include? That's really interesting. Typically, there's nothing in writing about it, and that it's in everybody's best interest to start talking once that happens. Any smart, practical composer who isn't so arrogant or careless that they don't want to learn from the performer if they accidentally have a slur across 2 octaves descending that is hard to do gracefully, and that, you may want to tongue it anyway. You may want to say, nobody can trill this interval, or a very fast tremolo like this isn't going to be as fast as the other tremolo that's next to it. Composer ought to learn from that. The best way to do it and include it in the contract. There are some contracts that I see from orchestras and opera companies where they ask to vet the piece in progress, and some composers say no. It's tricky, but the best way to do it is to ask the composer, how would you feel about some kind of clause like this, and to what extent it's appropriate, to what extent it's not appropriate. There are some I just saw one yesterday for a 10-minute orchestra piece from the BBC who's commissioning 25 composers to write 25 pieces about the 21st century for 2025. And they're going to have 25 premieres in 25. It's really a cool thing. Everyone has to pick an event that happened between 2020 and 25 and sign up for what year they're doing. It's going to be a lot of fun. But the contract said we have the right to not perform your piece if we don't like it. And I told the composer, no, a composer of your stature doesn't have to compromise their time so much. We'll still pay you, but it won't be performed by the BBC and broadcast all over the world. They might agree to it anyway. Very rarely do I see an orchestra refuse to perform a piece that they've paid for. Opera companies, because now opera companies are paying 6 figures often if it's a grand opera. They do, but it would cost them $1 million. If it's the Met, it would cost them $1 million to produce. So they're more likely to say, if we think, and so some composers might or might not agree to that. But what we're talking about is on a much smaller scale. What music program do you recommend now that finale is in a state of flux? Probably let's wait till the end. I could talk about that forever, and I would love to. But for what Chris's event is, let's see if there are other questions first, and then I'd love to talk about Dorico and stuff.
Okay.
And I can stay as long as you want, past the hour.
Okay, anybody else, put your questions in there. It's easy enough to type in a question. I mean, I'm trying to just, these are questions I have because people ask me all the time about things like this. And I have had to go back with pieces that I've commissioned and say, I specified that there be a contralto part in this piece and there isn't one. And the commissioner specifically asked for one. And so, it's like, that's a fault of the composer that they missed that. It was in the contract, but still, you want this person to be your friend. So you got to be nice about it, but it does happen. Absolutely does happen where something got overlooked, but you got to be nice about it.
Yeah. I see the names on here, and there are some composers in the audience who might have had experiences that turned bad by the lack of communication or the lack of any stories from Allie or Phyllis or Gay, or there's a lot of composers in here. That stories you'd be willing to share without names.
Okay, I have a question because again, people ask me. I mean, I have a bunch of pieces published. How do you go about presenting your piece to a publisher, whoever it might be? because Daniel is so even keeled about all this. How do you present your composition to a publisher that doesn't know who you are to hopefully get it published? What are the things that you need to be, as a composer, you need to be thinking about to have your piece actually published?
I would say first know the publisher, because the answer is going to be different for different publishers. There are some publishers. Now let's assume we're talking about low flute oriented new pieces, right? You know that there's Alri, you know that there's Tetractus, you know that there's Presser, you know lots of others. I mean, I think those are some of the more common names who are going to be in the repertoire. If you look carefully, you may see there are some differences in the type of repertoire that those publishers publish. Also, whether or not it looks like they always or generally publish from the composer's own edition, or if they always or usually publish from something they re-engrave.
Mhm.
One way to tell is if everything sort of looks like the same notation style and typesetting style. If you look at Presser, the regular publications that have print runs and so on and are in the stores, almost always are re-edited and re-engraved by us. But the pieces that are print on demand from us
Mhm.
are almost always the way that we got it from the composer. The older works in the False House catalog, which is now from us, but under the previous ownership through 2015, were almost always what the company got. Some of Gary Schocker's pieces were always re-engraved by Lisa MacArthur, and all of those looked like a common way. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying you can tell, I would think, and this might even sound backwards in a way, that if you're sending it to Tetractus, who not always, but frequently, I think, publishes from the composer's manuscript, the better your manuscript looks, the more, or the more usable the parts are, might influence. I can't speak for Carla. I don't know. But I'm guessing that if you're, for any publisher who's going to print from your materials, the way your materials look isn't all that important. If it's something that you're hoping Presser will make a regular publication out of and redo, or re-engrave, that's not too important. We're more concerned with, and again, of the publishers I'm mentioning, we're the only ones who have two buildings, or including Carl Fisher, who's our partner, lots of people's salaries, lots of people's health insurance, and we're a different kind of company. That the smaller companies have to make it worth their time to be
Mhm.
basically a sole proprietorship with extra people who are helping out. Compared to a big company, whether it's us or Kaiser or Boozy or Schirmer, there's there are owners and there are financial people who are involved in the decisions, and there are a lot of employees. So we have to sell more copies to make it worth it than other companies, which is one reason why you don't see a lot of a lot of flute choir music coming out of Presser compared to the others. It's not that we don't like it. It's that it takes more sales than we can ever get to be worth those efforts. Fortunately, we got the wonderful repertoire from False House through 2015. But to answer your question, which I didn't exactly do, I started with that because it depends. Each publisher is going to have different criteria. Norse Publications, Nancy does a lot. I don't know her catalog well. I know she primarily is a piccoloist herself, but I don't think the catalog is piccolo oriented. She does a lot of flute choir, right?
Mm-hmm. She does.
Right. So, and this is true no matter what you're doing. Know which publisher you're sending to. They're all reputable. You can trust all of them to pay your royalties. I don't know of any bad actors in our community at all. There's just no reason to. The royalties aren't that big, and everybody's trust and integrity in a small world is really important, and everybody wants you to love them. Everybody wants your next piece.
I
That sort of
think
answers. Yeah.
yeah, you have to do your homework. I mean, you
Mhm.
have to make sure that whatever your instrumentation is, that that publisher does that instrumentation, because if they don't, your chances of being accepted are slim. So yeah, you have to do your homework.
Yeah, and some of the homework is easy to do. If you're able to go to NFA, you can see who's there, but more important, you can see whose music
Hmm.
is in the large bins of the large retailers. In some ways, that's more important, but not in other ways, because you can see there are very few of these publishers, of the small publishers, like Ori and Presser are pretty much always there. There are a lot of good flute publishers who don't spend the money to exhibit there because a year's worth of profit for a small company can be eaten up by what it costs to exhibit at NFA.
Yeah,
We didn't even go 2 years ago, because of concerns like that.
yeah. Okay, so there was this we'll come back to the Dorico finale thing in a minute. So this person, I'm not sure who it is, Kat, I think, arranged a piece from TSO. I don't know what TSO is.
Trans-Siberian Orchestra?
Ah.
I don't know. Is that I'm guessing I get the prize. Okay, well, okay, so now that we're on to this other topic, let me talk about arrangeme.com.
Ah,
Actually, Phyllis is probably the best one to talk about ArrangeMe, but I'll start. Um, Anytime you arrange copyrighted music, you need to have explicit permission from the copyright holder. I can digress more into how you know if it's copyrighted, if it's an older piece, but if it's popular music that's from our lifetime, it definitely is.
mhm.
It's possible to go to the copyright holder, and in most cases for pop music, Hal Leonard is the representative of most pop music companies, but not all. You can go to Hal Leonard's regular portal and write in and say you want permission to make a flute choir arrangement of Africa, let's say. Oh, I like that idea. I think I want to do that. Probably it's been done a lot already. So um, they could say yes or no. They could say yes on the following conditions and fees and whatever. And sometimes that works. But Hal Leonard, several years ago, now probably like 10 or 15 years ago, bought Sheet Music Plus,
Mhm.
and which is definitely the biggest retailer in the US. And when they bought it, originally they bought it just to be another money-making asset in their corporation and to not touch a winning formula, make it. And to a large extent, they haven't. They're very fair. If you go and see what they're promoting on the front page of Sheet Music Plus, it's like a innocent, independent music store. It's all the publisher's music. But they have an extra side thing, which is that after a while, Sheet Music Plus created SMP Press.
Mhm.
This was roughly the same time that J.W. Pepper and Sibelius and Finale and several other platforms took advantage of the fact that they had a tremendous infrastructure on their website that could do commerce. So all these places set up so that if a composer or an arranger wanted to upload a piece to their website and make it a sellable product, they would be the sales infrastructure.
Mhm.
And this website would do all the business of taking the orders, taking the credit cards, and then downloading to the customer the PDFs that you gave them, and then paying you a percentage. They all, in their various ways, had a great infrastructure, and I've never heard anyone complain about not getting paid or whatever. And they all did almost nothing to promote it.
Yeah.
You're on your own to do everything other than the actual cash back and forth in the download. And then Sheet Music Plus, this was before Hal Leonard, I think. I don't remember exactly. But then when Hal Leonard got involved, they had this wonderful idea that allows us to play Phyllis's arrangements of pop songs, whereby anything that's in the Hal Leonard catalog of works they represent on behalf of other publishers, not anything, but a great many, can be automatically licensed for you to make your arrangement through them, which at the time first was called SMP Press. And that infrastructure, along with taking your file and then doing all what I was saying about, will take care of the licensing, and they will keep the majority of, if it was your own work, you'd get the majority of the royalties. I don't know the numbers. But they'll take the majority of the percentage because they have to pay the copyright holder in addition to their own share. But it becomes very fast and easy for you to make a flute choir arrangement of Africa or whatever. And Phyllis, do you want to talk more about your experience with that? Because you're my favorite example of how this can really be a tremendous outlet.
Well, yeah, I actually found out about it from my friend Lisa Choco, who plays in our flute choir, or at the time was playing in our flute choir, another flutist, and so she was doing these great arrangements, and she kind of turned me on to the whole thing. So I got into it fairly early, although not as early as she did, and it was nice because, for our flute choirs, summer things, it was nice to have some of that, the pop songs and that sort of thing to add to our repertoire. And it's been, it's been a good experience. I think we get, I'm trying to think of what the percentage on the, arrangements of copyrighted material is not super high. I think it's like, maybe 10%, something like that. And but I have a few original things on there that, just I never got published, some flute choir things, and then on those I think you get like 50% of the cover price. But it's, you basically, I do the finale files, program notes page, and, like, and the score, and you just put all the PDFs in one document. So that's what, when you buy the PDF of whatever piece you're getting, you get the score and all the instrumentation and program notes and all that kind of stuff. But it's good, and and a lot of things have have sold well, but they've also been dinking around with the formatting, and you can pay extra now to have, I don't know, some prominent placement, and to get, I don't know, 2% more or something in royalties, and it's like, so I haven't done that part of it, but it's good, if you want to legally be able to arrange some of these things, and it's just like there's thousands, there's millions of things, a lot of the things, I've never heard of, but there's a lot of opportunities for that sort of thing, and
including serious music from the Schirmer catalog, because Hal Leonard also was their representative. So last year, a friend of mine said, I really want to transcribe the Poulenc Sonata for alto. Not transpose the piano, just make a transposed solo part for alto and bring it down when it's necessary. But I want to sell it. I don't just want to play it myself. I want it to be, is there any way that I can do that? And I explained why no way. And I said, but Schirmer does have Hal Leonard doing their licensing. So just on a long shot, let's go look at arrangeme.com, which I didn't say that's what sheet music SMP Press changed their name last year or so to arrangeme.com. And I go there and type Poulenc, and lo and behold, you can make your own arrangement of the Poulenc Flute Sonata and do it the same way that Phyllis would do a Chuck Berry song and sell it for you get 10%, I guess, and you can sell your transposed part. I didn't look too much further, and I'm going to guess that they don't do that for Adagio for strings, but they might. And, because that might be, it's up to Schirmer to say what pieces they're going to restrict or not.
Mm.
I don't know,
Well,
but
I
it
know
certainly
that,
is worth looking if you're curious.
Well, Flute Force did an arrangement of the Adagio for strings.
I think Rhea got permission, right? From Schirmer. Because Schirmer has a few published versions of that.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
a quartet that I played with bought it. We played it. So
I want to
Yeah.
throw in here the fact you have to do your own marketing, which is so much more time consuming than you realize. So, I mean, I have some things on Sheet Music Plus also, but again, you have to do all your own marketing. And, again, if you haven't done marketing before, it takes so much more time than you think. So,
Yeah, that's true. But for those of you who are older than 30, I say that as a rough number, but because those of us who remember marketing before the internet or before Facebook and Instagram, marketing is a lot easier and cheaper once you have the content ready to go. What Chris is describing, absolutely, and the standards raise and raise and raise
yeah.
for how to stand out and look really special in the crowd. And Canva became like this incredible tool for people who don't have all the
Yeah.
expensive software. And because Canva became so big, now InDesign has to compete with Canva, which is a little backwards from how it used to be. InDesign doesn't want to lose people who were only using it to make posters. So everybody's improving their game, which is a great segue to Finale, because this is what happened with engraving software. I've been in the middle of that since the beginning, and I actually am still only using myself a program called Score that was written in Fortran and upgraded to DOS, and it still only runs on DOS, but you can get a DOS substitute. And Score, in my opinion, still gets the best results, but it's not fun. It's not as graphic to use. It's very hard to learn, and it doesn't do anything but engraving. There's no MIDI or whatever. I'm in the middle right now of a 2-year communication with somebody who wrote a terrific converter software to go from Score software into Music XML. But he's elderly now and seems to be having trouble communicating. And it's the only way I can save all my music upwards to XML for the future. So Finale was the first. Back then. There were many early not MS-DOS, early Windows, early Finale programs. Very few of them survived more than a few years. There was one called Beethoven, and Control V was not regular paste. Control V was paste sequences and control downward, and Control Shift V was to paste a sequence upward, and V was after Vivaldi. For those who don't know the term, sequence is when a musical pattern repeats exactly up a step or down a step. But this was before Control V was what it became. But Finale was terrific at marketing. The original program was written by two guys in in southern Minnesota, who were doing a hymnal, and they needed to get lots of words in relationship to the notes. So they made the notes that are real skinny. That's why the Petrucci font looks funny. We've gotten used to it, but it really is a terrible note shape. And because it's like this, and when you tilt like that, it has to be a smaller note because it's going to hit the ceiling sooner. And so gradually Finale became a little better, but then Sibelius was written only for an operating system called Acorn, which is not Mac or not Apple and not Microsoft. Acorn was only available in England and I think Canada for a while. It eventually went out of business, I think, but Sibelius was written for Acorn. And the British musicians were saying that we have this thing called Sibelius that's much better than Finale. And we said, yeah, well, we can't get Acorn, so tell them to get with the picture. Eventually, they got lots of startup, Sibelius got lots of startup money to convert it for the world market. And Sibelius then became a challenge to Finale, which made Finale have to get great MIDI, or what at the time was a great leap forward in MIDI and synchronizing with videos and other music fonts and so on. And those two had a big dogfight for a while, which was great for the customers because they had to keep on getting better than each other. And that's where all these flexible features came from. In the course of getting bigger and getting backers in order to do it, they both became owned and traded on the stock market and eventually bought out by bigger companies. Sibelius was bought by Avid, which was a very aggressive company for a lot of media software. They had Pro Tools, which also got bought out and changed, and or they bought Pro Tools, as part of just becoming a conglomerate. Finale was sold to Peaksware, which is a sports software company. And the sports software company was so good at self-correction and self-monitoring and measure yourself that it was a great fit for the one feature of Finale, like smart music and what they used to do originally with Vivace, where you could monitor your own playing. And so smart music turned into make music under Peaksware because it was a great fit with all the software where you time yourself, you monitor yourself, you get rated, and that's become a big piece of make music. So Finale gravitated in that direction with all the interactions with the user. And I don't know the inside story of what happened a few months ago, but from what I understand from the messages that the owners of Finale sent, the reprogramming of that software in order to be compatible with each successive Mac iOS was an incredible amount of work. I think that there was some of this with Windows iOS changes, but not as serious as with the Mac iOS changes. And those of you who use Finale on Mac probably have had experiences where once you upgraded one, you had to sort of reconfigure or upgrade the other, sometimes the compatibility was a problem. So what the announcement said a few months ago, or maybe it was the second or third letter after the first announcement, was that the amount of copies that they're selling of Finale just doesn't balance the amount of IT salary time to keep it current in case there's future OS updates. And then there was one a few weeks later, right? Remember, I forget what name it was, but the new Mac OS came out only a few weeks after that announcement. So in the meantime, when Sibelius was bought out by Avid, and Avid was then bought by private equity owners who tend to only care about money and not the product that they're making the money with.
Yeah.
All the people at Avid, and therefore all the people at Sibelius, had to some extent a different focus of how to be a profitable business. One of the things they did is fired the top product designers at Pro Tools, at Sibelius. I know this because my best friend growing up from high school was one of the lead designers of Pro Tools. and they got rid of people with high salaries. So there's a guy named Daniel Spreadbury who was the head program designer for Sibelius for a long time. He knew everything. He knew everybody. He knew all the other engraving software. He knew all the publishers. He knew full-time engravers. He knew the theater people who need to do things really quickly, like to get something on the music stands. He knew the classical music people, and he was ambitious. So Spreadbury said, okay, I'm going to create a new program from scratch that has all the strong spots of every different program that's out there and meets the needs of every type of user. And if I started from scratch, I don't have to accommodate what was there before me because I know what I want to accomplish. And he got Steinberg, which is a German company in media software, who's owned by Yamaha, who has all the R&D money in the world and is not going to get bought by private equity because they're Yamaha. He got them to say, okay, um, we'll start paying you a salary for your time to build this for us. And that worked out. And so that led to Dorico. The word Dorico comes from, I think he said, the second engraver in the history of the world. Petrucci was the first engraver, which is where the name of the finale font comes from. Dorico is now, I mean, when all the publishers and engraver only people who were like looking at everything saw it, they said, this should be able to overcome every other software, but it's going to take time because it really does meet everybody's needs. And we had a meeting with all the publishers who tended to not like Sibelius or Finale in certain ways. And we tried to stump, this is when he was ready to launch 1.0. We tried to stump Spreadberry with things to engrave that are really, that we know are hard for any software to engrave. Like when you have chords in a piano that are right next to each other and you got to get all the little ties. And he said, well, I'll show, there are 17 versions, 17 solutions to that. Each one has variations. So I'll show you. I said, the mere fact that you answered that way. And so let me jump forward ahead. Right now they're up to, I think, version 5. It has become really terrific like that. And the downside is the learning curve is not fast.
Yeah.
Sibelius is one of their strengths was that it was a very fast learning curve to get good with Sibelius. And then eventually there were some things you couldn't do. Dorico was frustrating to learn. And everyone who loves it now says the first few weeks, man, I was cursing at it. I was cursing at everybody who told me to get it. But once I became proficient in knowing how its logic works, which is counterintuitive. If you're used to Finale, the logic of how Dorico works is counterintuitive. So there is a YouTube out there by a composer named Jonathan Newman, the way it sounds, who learned every program over the years. He's about 50. Now, he had learned every program, and then he eventually learned Dorico. Said, oh my God, I wish I had done this sooner. It takes so much less time to do everything, composing and engraving. And I said, that's exactly what Viet Quang told to me. That's exactly what Amanda Harburg told me. That's exactly what lots of other people, that it's frustrating to get through. And if you have deadlines, if you're a full-time composer primarily, I haven't made the jump yet because I don't want to take the time with some deadlines. But once you get there, it's so flexible, and the MIDI is terrific. Jonathan Cohen, talk to John about it because John just went through this last month. He
went to
sent me,
Dorico?
yeah, he sent me an email when he got started that was very unhappy, and he was very unhappy that I was suggesting that he might be happy with it. I said, John, if there's anyone in the world who can learn how to navigate a computer program, you're the one. And talk to Amanda, who he's friends with, and these other people. 2 weeks later, John sends me his newest piece, which he had done completely in Dorico. He said, I've never made a MIDI that I loved listening to without, I mean, up until now, without saying, well, it's good for MIDI. And he sent me the MIDI. Actually, I don't know if he sent me the music, but talk to John.
Okay.
Because he's someone in your community who
Yeah.
is very trusted and respected on his opinions.
Okay, I think we should wrap it up. A lot of people wanting
okay.
to leave, but so you've convinced me to start transitioning to Dorico.
Yeah, and so just to answer one last question, Dorico imports XML like every program. No program exports XML in a way that's flawless, so that you will have to clean stuff up when you bring in Finale files or Sibelius files.
Okay. All right.
And I don't know much about VST, but there's a lot of compatibility there to Andrew's question.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris, for this
Okay.
platform.
See, I learned a whole lot because
Mhm.
I've this whole finale thing. I thought, oh, that doesn't affect me because I switched to Sibelius years ago, which I
Oh,
thought
okay.
was so much
Stay
more
there.
effective. But
Stay
now
there.
that I
Yeah.
hear that it's undergoing these, this private equity company, I mean, how much longer is it going to last? So,
Well, so that raises the question that I don't know, which is what's going on between Make Music and Dorico.
yeah,
Did Dorico go to Sibelius and Make Music and bid out something? And what about MuseScore? Because
yeah. News score is in there too. Yeah.
MuseScore looks really nice. Whenever I see stuff in MuseScore, I wonder what I'm looking at that looks so nice. And it's got an easy learning curve. But MuseScore at the same time is also the evil empire that is the world's biggest sheet music piracy source. I
Oh,
think that's based in Russia and no publishers can get to them. And
oh,
they just bought Hal Leonard 2 years ago. And so the private equity that bought Hal Leonard is MuseScore's ownership, which means that the biggest pirate bought the biggest copyright resource. And everybody was like shocked. And what's going to happen now? Because those two are big organizations who are essentially at odds with each other. And nothing has happened,
wow.
seriously. Maybe MuseScore is just getting rich on both sides and doesn't want to rock the boat. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And okay, this is like, wow.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. But like from the standpoint of notation,
Yeah.
the publishers say we can't mention that MuseScore looks good because we can't say anything good about MuseScore because they're sucking our blood, which is true.
Okay.
But when I'm here talking about what notation works well, I mean, it is like if you're going to do an arrangement quickly, it's going to look nice. It did,
Wow.
usually
Okay.
just like with music notes. I mean, they were one of a million companies who were selling what they were, and they're the only one who survived because their upper management is smart. They knew how to, be the one that people went to.
Yeah. Wow. This has been a real eye opener. I just,
Oh, good.
it's kind of scary. It's kind of
Mhm.
scary what's going on.
Well, I mean, so Chris, not giving any secrets, but you're one of us who remembers before there was an internet, right?
Yes.
And Xerox machines were destroying the music business, and cassette tapes were destroying the recording industry, and they really were.
Yeah.
And so this is just exponential.
Yeah. And it's also very hard to self-publish, which we didn't even touch on that whole end of the
Mhm.
thing, but we've, didn't even talk again. It's all, wow, this is scary. This is scary. And we've got to find a way to keep moving forward though, and keep our composers employed, keep our publishing companies in business,
Well,
whatever it takes. Yeesh.
so there are two lectures that people ask me to do, not infrequently. This is one of them, and the other one is copyright and publishing. That really needs 90 minutes, but we could do that next year
We can do that next
or in
year.
the spring or
Okay.
whatever.
Okay. Okay, I'm writing that down. Again, we've just, and I mean, Allie self-publishes. I see Allie up there with little hearts floating up above her head. I mean, you can self-publish. Marketing's tough, but we also there are times a publisher like Presser or whoever. Hopefully, you won't be bought out by a private equity
Now,
firm.
we are owned by the Carl Fisher
Carl
heirs.
Fisher. Okay.
Yeah, by like several generations down from Carl Fisher, the person.
Yeah.
And they are so proud of their family heritage
Ah.
that it would be unthinkable because that pride drives them. As long as we're doing okay,
Mhm.
um, sometimes they lean on us harder about being more profitable, but they're not going to, because of the family pride, there aren't too many. The Kaiser is like this.
Yeah.
They're a newer publisher, and it's the son of the founder, and he's only 40-ish. But, some companies are less likely. The ones who go public are the ones who are going to get bought by private equity. That makes sense. Like E.C. Shermer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, first, Galaxy was bought by E.C. Shermer, and Galaxy probably doesn't have much flute music. They probably have some serious stuff from the mid-century. But E.C. Shermer was bought by Morningstar, which is not the stock Morningstar.
Right. I was going to say, okay.
It's a Morningstar Press, I think, is a primarily religious choral music.
Oh.
And for some good reason that I don't know, they just sort of doubled their point of view and added all of E.C. Shermer, which is a really nice catalog for choral and instrumental.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. This is incredible. This is just the information. I mean, we all usually have our own bubble, but it's nice to know what's going on in places that are going to affect us down the road so that we can start thinking about how we can modify what we do to keep us all excited about solving new puzzles, I guess.
Everything is always changing, and I pretty much know everybody who's left. So you might have heard me say this before, but one of the good side effects of the pandemic is that while some people just were too unmotivated to keep playing or whatever, everybody else was so motivated that they invented new ways to keep playing, keep their name out there. Allie, you bought yourself a whole studio, right? So you could overtrack and.
Well, I created my in-home studio.
Yeah.
When I was still in Connecticut. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly what I mean. Like, and there was some software, like the audio software industry was the big winner because so many people bought software to overdub themselves and bought microphones and so on. And so, and like, we're talking on Zoom.
Yeah.
When was the last time you were on Skype?
Did anybody buy stock in Zoom pre-pandemic?
We should have.
I'm pretty certain they're on their own private islands now.
Exactly, Robin.
There was a peak, but now it's not so much. Anyway.
Are they their own company or are they a division of something?
No idea.
You would think that one of the, like Google or Alphabet would want to buy them, or.
Wat is het? De vergadering. Sorry.
I think they're still an independent company. I'm pretty certain, but they could have been bought by someone else at this point.
Okay. Anyway, we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah. Okay. I'm having too much fun.
Thank you, Danny.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you, Dan. This was really
okay.
Really.
Wait.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
See you all later.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Robin.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.